Riot gear is heavy, but there is a comfort to it. You get used to it, and it is built to be worn for a long time. But sitting there, in the back of that RCV, I didn't know what to expect. The order had come out of nowhere. We were told there would be at least 350 people rioting, and the scene was getting worse by the minute. There were already squads on site putting down a perimeter, but I still had no idea what to expect. The others were nervous. They were psyching themselves up. Lewis was playing music in his headphones loud enough for me to hear it, 3 seats away. The other officers were checking their gear, going through their checklists. We'd stopped asking questions. There was nothing more to tell about what we were stepping into. When the door swung open, we were ready for anything. Shields up, we stepped out. We expected yelling, screeching megaphones, sirens, fire. But what we ran into was, possibly, the one thing we didn't know how to handle. A completely empty street. All 350 people who'd been there just 15 minutes earlier were gone. There were large cardboard signs without prints, gas masks and improvised weapons littering the sidewalk. A nearby store had been looted, and there were signs of sporadic violence, but not a soul there. A couple of pigeons were inspecting a lost jacket. I'd never seen anything like it. Sure, some gatherings dissolve, but not before the police arrive. "Check for bystanders," the captain called out. "Someone had to see something." I wasn't sure what to think. I walked up to Lewis, who'd picked up a spray can. "What do you make of this?" I asked. "Something's up," he said, handing over the spray can. "It's empty." "So?" Lewis stretched out his arms, making a point. "Where's the graffiti?" As we took a walk around town, it became increasingly clear that everyone had heard some sort of commotion, but no one had any idea what happened. I talked to an elderly couple who told me they'd heard shouting and glass breaking, but they had no idea what it was about or where everyone went. "Do you know what they were protesting?" I asked. "Some legislation, probably," said the elderly man. "Always something." "Did you hear anything?" "No, I can't say that I did," he clarified. "They chanted something, but I can't tell what." "But you heard it?" I asked. "You sure you heard something?" Yeah, he insisted. "Just can't remember what." Things were getting stranger. Traffic cams didn't show anyone leaving or entering the area, and the surveillance cameras in nearby buildings hadn't caught anything. The convenience store camera had been broken for years. Still, we knew for a fact that there had been people there. We were ordered to expand the search and to start knocking on doors. Some of us, me included, suited back down to our uniforms. Lewis and I started knocking doors at a nearby apartment complex. For the first 2 floors, no one had seen or heard anything. All we got was confused looks and shrugs. Most had heard something, but that was all we got. It wasn't until we reached the 3rd floor that we met someone who had a few more answers. Apparently, she'd been out to buy groceries from the corner shop. "The street was packed," she said. "They came out of nowhere, all ragged, wearing these weird masks. Not like the anonymous masks, more like, I don't know, hard to explain." As we kept knocking doors, we heard the intermittent reports coming in. Over at the student housing area, they'd found an entire floor of empty rooms. Over 30 student rooms, suddenly abandoned. There used to be a month-long waiting list for students to even apply for a spot there, so 30 rooms suddenly empty out of nowhere was absurd. Still, no one seemed to know anything about it. That seemed to be the common theme. Everyone knew there had been people living there, but there were no details about them. No one knew their age, names, gender, or what they'd studied. These rooms had been used until just earlier that week, but all of a sudden, they were just abandoned. 30 rooms don't just become available out of nowhere. People need help moving their things. There had to be cars coming in and out of the parking lot. Someone, somewhere, had to know something. And yet, they didn't. Many hours later, the sun started to set. We still had no answers. Reports were written up, the night shift took over, and I went home with a whole bunch of questions in the back of my mind. I took the scenic route through the tunnel and over the bridge by the old campgrounds. Then, as I passed the riverside, I noticed an abandoned car by the side of the road. Now, I usually take that road about 3 times a week, and I hadn't seen any abandoned vehicles there previously. This was new. Thinking someone might have run out of gas or popped a tyre, I decided to stop and help. I pulled over and got a closer look at the car, a white Toyota, probably Alesse, new and shiny. The passenger side door was open, but the car was empty. I had this strange feeling that I'd seen that car before, but I couldn't put my finger on where. I was getting nervous, and I didn't even know why. I called out with a loud, "Hello?" But there was no one around to answer. I noticed the high grass leading down to the river had been pushed down, forming a path. Someone had stepped out and, seemingly in a hurry, ran in a straight line away from the car. Following the trail, I reached the edge of the river. Suddenly, the tracks just stopped. I noticed something half buried in the riverbank. It was this strange white-faced mask, made out of reinforced plaster. It was heavy, with a double set of clasps on the back, but the strangest thing about the mask was, by far, the face. It had this strange, neutral expression. The eyes had different sizes, and the mouth was half open, not as in a smile, but in slight surprise. I had never seen anyone wear one of those before, and it looked custom-made. Maybe it was related to the riot. I returned to my car and reported the abandoned vehicle. The mask, however, I kept. There was a story there. As I got home that night, I had the strangest feeling of being watched. My 2 German shepherds, Jazzy and Blues, seemed equally on edge. Living alone, they can be a bit of a handful at times, but I loved them nonetheless. As I was milling about in the kitchen making dinner, the 2 of them just sat by the back door and stared out. They aren't the kind of dogs to get easily distracted, and they weren't barking. They were just sitting there, like they were waiting for something to happen. I took my dogs out on their evening walk, but I couldn't avoid the feeling of being watched. Jazzy would stop every now and then and look over his shoulder, and Blues was making strange whining noises, and yet we were alone. No ominous winds blowing, just a long, silent walk, and this unwelcome feeling that something was horribly wrong. Like I was missing something obvious. As I spread myself out in my king-sized bed, I took a final look at the mask I'd found by the river. It was large, too large for me, and there was something strange about the expression. I'd set it down on my sock drawer at the end of the room. Had the expression changed? As I got up to the station the next morning, everyone was already up in arms. Lewis seemed to be on his 4th cup of coffee. "That car you called in," he said, pointing at me with his whole hand. "That was just one. There's dozens. An entire parking lot down by the diner. 2 more cars by the railway station. Probably more out by the campgrounds. No shit. And whose is it? Who are these people?" "That's the thing," Lewis laughed. "Unregistered. Every single one. Unregistered. No names. All invalid plates. No insurance registry." "You're kidding?" "I fucking wish," he laughed. "This is going to be a nightmare. Grab a file and a coffee. We're on overtime." Our lieutenant had brought in a plate of danishes and about a dozen coffees from a nearby shop. That was never a good sign. Cars were getting towed and impounded. I was in charge of registration and organising pickup, but it was clear that this was a bigger effort than expected. Even with a good pace, it'd be a 12-hour workday. At one point, I just started photocopying registration forms and just signing them left and right, just changing the letters of the license plate. As our lieutenant brought in Chinese food, I took a short break. I started noticing a few things about the office. Nothing big, but slightly out of place. For example, there were a few workstations unattended, and we seemed a bit understaffed. I could have sworn we used to be more people. It just felt a bit empty. I didn't get off work until 9:20. Jazzy and Blues had to stay with my sister for the night. It was hard to explain to her exactly why we were working so much overtime and what was going on. A riot without rioters. People disappearing, leaving their cars and homes behind. And then there was that. Something. That feeling I was missing something. And back home, I still had this strange mask waiting for me. I stopped to grab some groceries on my way home. As I walked out of the store, I saw a notice on the window asking for new part-timers. It looked recent. I turned back and walked up to the cashier, a middle-aged man, eager to get back to his crosswords. "Excuse me," I said. "Did you put up the help wanted ad?" "I did," he nodded. "You interested?" "Sorry, no," I smiled. "Did somebody quit?" "Nah, nothing like that," he sighed. "We're just having some scheduling problems." "What kind of problems?" "Well, He put away his newspaper and leaned back in his chair. "I was supposed to go home about 4 hours ago, but we had no one to cover me." "Do you usually have that?" "I think so, yeah." "So in a way, it's like someone's missing." We looked at one another, trying to find the right words. He was about as stunned as I was. "Yeah," he nodded. "Yeah, like someone's missing." I decided to take a walk around town. It felt like my eyes were opening. The local cinema had a note on the front informing customers about shorter opening hours. The parking lot by the gym seemed emptier than usual. And, as I was about to turn back to my car, I noticed a golden retriever. It was still wearing a leash, but there was no one to hold it. As I approached it, it took off running. I called the station about the runaway dog and headed back home. That night, my house felt emptier than usual. I'd always lived larger than I needed to, but there was still something awkward about feeling small in your own home. I'd gotten that place years ago, figuring I'd start my own family someday. Still, things just hadn't worked out that way. It takes a special kind of person to date a cop, I suppose. After my evening workout and shower, I brushed my teeth. I couldn't help but notice how tired I looked. I wasn't sleeping right. There was something in the back of my mind that just couldn't surface. Even now, looking at myself, I could feel something missing. A piece of the puzzle, right in front of me. My stomach churned, and I wrote it off as stress. As I cleaned my toothbrush, a thought struck me. I opened the bathroom cabinet. On the bottom shelf were several items that just didn't seem to fit with the rest. A couple of brightly coloured razors, a box of tampons, bobby pins, makeup remover, tweezers, and an extra toothbrush. None of these were mine. Sure, whenever you've lived somewhere for a long time, you collect things that aren't your own, but still, this was something out of the ordinary. I lived alone. I always had. As I walked around the apartment, that churning in my stomach turned into a rock. I could see things a little clearer. The king-sized bed, which was far too large for me. An unused drawer in my closet. A half-empty coat rack. Finally, in my home office, I found a laptop that I didn't know the password to. How could I own a computer and not know how to use it? And the dogs. I usually didn't leave them at the doggy daycare with my sister. Someone looked after them while I was at work. But who? Someone's missing, I muttered to myself. Jesus Christ, someone's missing. I opened my phone and scrolled back a few weeks. So many pictures, but most had been corrupted. Some were just black bars hinting at a colourful background. Others were just plain white. Most of my voicemails were just garbled, screeching nonsense. And there, on my bedside table, was an empty picture frame. I couldn't sleep that night. I didn't know what to do. It was that kind of night where I just closed my eyes and waited for sleep, but sleep never came. Instead, I had these vivid half-dreams, and no matter how much I twisted and turned, I couldn't get comfortable. Too warm, too cold. Finally, about 3 a.m, I brought out some extra pillows, hugging them tight and burying my face in them. I felt something resembling peace. A familiarity, a shape that my body was aching to remember. And right there, on the edge of sleep, I heard something. Sorry. I sat straight up. The room was empty. Too empty, if anything. Who's there? I called out. Who are you? But there was no response. There was no one there. Letting my paranoia take hold, I brought out my handgun and started checking all rooms. Finally, I settled in the living room. Sinking down into my sofa with a warm blanket, I fell asleep, staring out the sliding glass door. I thought about calling in sick for work, but I couldn't leave Lewis hanging. They were already working overtime, and I couldn't leave him like that. Instead, I took a long shower, chugged my morning coffee, and got dressed. I almost forgot to tie my shoes on the way out. The station was bustling with energy. Some of the night shift were still around, half sleeping at their desks. The lieutenant had once again brought in a plate of danishes and a dozen more coffees. The struggle wasn't over. Things were getting stranger throughout the day. We got called out by a landlord who wanted to find their missing tenant, but couldn't give us a name or a description. All they knew was that they were missing. There was also chatter around the station about abandoned bikes by the high school. A motel at the edge of town had started questioning why 3 of their rooms had been rented for a week, but there was no one there to use them. The rumour mill was running hot. I couldn't help myself. My anxiety grew, and that little voice in the back of my head kept screaming at me that people had gone missing. A lot of people, all at once. But the most awful feeling came from that empty picture frame on my bedside table. Why would I ever keep an empty picture frame by my bed? I got home around 7 p.m. that night. My sister was worried about me, but I told her it'd just be a few days. Things were still crazy, but I was getting by. Soon enough, it had all died down. As I walked from room to room, I took off my socks and felt a caffeine headache starting to set in. Putting away my phone, a chill rushed up my spine. I wasn't alone. Looking down my unit hallway, I didn't see anything. The lights were off, and the dark wallpaper didn't help. As my hand reached for the light switch, I heard a noise. Stop! It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the white mask I had found. Peering into my bedroom, I saw the mask resting on top of my sock drawer. The expression had changed, going from a surprised neutral to a wide-eyed stare. Mouth wide open, it had tipped to one side and was meeting my gaze. What? I said out loud, surprising myself. Do not. Nothing more than a faint whisper. It was clearly coming from the strange mask. My left hand started shaking, fingers uneasily resting on the light switch. Do not look at me. It was a standoff. The mask was referring to whatever was waiting at the end of the hallway. I could barely hear myself think. My mind stuck between several simultaneous impulses. I could turn on the light and challenge whatever was in there. I could get my gun. And yet, all I did was hold my breath and listen. There was no training to account for this stuff. There was no rational response. The hallway moved. At least, that's what it looked like from where I was standing. Something so tall it reached the ceiling with ease started moving. This tall, elongated presence, dressed in what looked like a ruined hoodie and faded, dirt-stained jeans. Something that could pass for a person at a distance, like camouflage. Long leather-like fingers covered its face, hiding it from me. I let go of the light switch. Fumbling backwards, snagging my foot on the corner of a carpet, I fell flat, knocking the air out of my lungs. It took a step further. An impossibly long arm reached into my bedroom. Without even leaving the hallway, it grabbed the mask from my sock drawer. "You can look now. Thank you." It sounded sincere. It was getting closer. I was crawling backwards, kicking myself away, until I felt my back press up against the wall. The mask writhed, arranging itself, a nose getting smaller, eyes thinner, cheeks puffier. It was turning into a woman's face, the hoodie almost resembling long black hair in this light. The creature leaned over me, and as the face came closer, I forgot how to breathe. Suddenly, a woman's voice. "I am sorry." I closed my eyes as it drew closer. I couldn't focus. I held up my hands to defend myself, but it was nothing but instinct. "I won't forget you." The words were whispered into my ear. I knew that voice. I'd heard it. That voice was a voice of sleepy Sunday mornings and Netflix binging, the voice of homemade lasagna and long road trips with jazzy and blues. I'd heard it 1,000 times, and suddenly I was hearing it for the first time. As my heart broke, a pair of ice-cold plaster lips kissed my cheek. I screamed. I barely even noticed the other people. They'd come through the back door and the bedroom windows, at least a dozen of them, all dressed in the same white masks. They flocked around the tall figure, looking down at me with weapons at the ready. Chains, bats, lead pipes. Some were breathing heavily, others just stared at me. They all hid behind their masks, their faces distorted in impossible proportions. I pulled my hair, trying to understand why I was in such pain. Why was I missing someone so much without having even the slightest memory of them? One by one, they all stepped out of my front door, leaving me broken on the hallway floor. All that remained was a gift, my own white mask, left on the bedroom windowsill. It looked sad. I've had a hard time understanding what happened the day of the riot. I think there had to be people there, but we just collectively forgot about them. Maybe it wasn't even a riot. The first time I tried wearing that mask, I could have sworn I heard that woman's voice again, calling out to me, asking about my day. Since then, I've worn it every single night as I go to bed. The pillows I hug feel more alive, warmer, and sometimes I can almost see her in the corner of my eye. But it affects me. I get this feeling that this is a dangerous path to take, and I'm not sure I can turn back. Even just wearing it every now and then is the only thing that stops my heartache for a while, as I trick myself into thinking she's there. And I know she's real in some way. I got the password for the laptop. Lately, my mask has started to change expression. It has gone from tragically sad to this manic-looking stare. I feel better than ever wearing it. I can laugh again, dance again. I can feel a familiar warmth when I lay down to sleep. I can feel a hand on my shoulder when I cook, something that guides me to what spices to use to make everything taste as it used to. I'm starting to remember things, details, words. I don't care if it's too late. I don't think I can ever give this up. Not now. Not ever.